In our last video, we discussed about erythropoiesis. Today we are going to discuss about disorders of the RBCs. Hello students, I am Dr. Faisal and you are watching Bioshin classes. Let's get started. We have discussed in the previous section that normal RBCs, their shape is biconcave and the size is 7.2 to 7.8 micron meter. This we have already discussed in the previous section. The shape, it's very significant. If the shape of the RBC is going to change, it will cause hemolysis, and size is also important for the RBCs. Today we are going to discuss regarding some of the disorders. First, talking about the size of the RBCs. Whenever there is change in size or there is abnormality in size, that is known as anisocytosis. Anisocytosis, anisocytosis. Anisocytosis is a term used whenever there is change in size of the RBCs. Okay, if the RBC size change, it is known as anisocytosis. And size can change in two forms. Either the size will decrease, either the size will increase. If RBC size it is decreased, it is known as microcyte, and if the size it increase, it is known as macrocyte, and if it is normal, it is known as normocyte. Okay, so normocyte, if the size decrease, it is known as microcyte, and if the size increase, it is known as macrocyte. Let us discuss this microcyte in detail. Microcyte means RBC whose size is less. Normal, if RBC was like this, if the cell size decreases, it is known as microcyte. And one very important cause of this microcyte is iron deficiency anemia. Whenever iron is less in the body, it results into a type of disorder that is known as microcytic anemia. Microcytic anemia. What is microcytic anemia? It's a type of anemia in which the size of RBC is less. Why the size of RBC is less? Because hemoglobin cannot be formed. Why hemoglobin cannot be formed? Because you know hemoglobin, it is made of heme and globin, and heme, it contains iron. If iron is less, hemoglobin cannot be formed, which results into a condition that is known as microcytic anemia. Microcytic means smaller size of the RBC, and to correct it, we need to supplement the iron. This is the most common cause of anemia in our country. Second kind of disorder is whenever the size of the RBC increases, this is known as macrocyte, or this is known as macrocytic anemia. It is known as macrocytic anemia because size of the RBC is very large. If this is normal RBC, the size will become like this. Why this happens? If you remember the process of erythropoiesis, I told you vitamin B12 and folic acid, they are very important for the process of maturation. What is meant by maturation? A maturation means a process by which immature RBC, it gets converted into mature RBC. And one very important change which was happening during maturation was size was getting reduced. If B12 and folic acid, they are absent, they are not present, the maturation will not happen. If maturation will not happen, the size is not going to decrease. When the size will not decrease, the RBC will remain as the immature RBC, and immature RBC has a larger size. Okay, this is macrocytic anemia, which happens in two conditions. Number one is B12 deficiency, another is folic acid. Whenever it is because of B12 deficiency, it is known as pernicious anemia. And if it is because of folic acid, it is known as megaloblastic anemia. In both these disorders, I told you the maturation fails. The maturation of the RBC, it fails. When maturation fails, the size of the RBC remains large. And we have two things, one is pernicious anemia and one is megaloblastic anemia. To summarize, we have three kinds of disorder in size. One is microcytic, one is pernicious anemia, one is megaloblastic anemia. Microcytic anemia is because of iron deficiency, because hemoglobin cannot be formed. Pernicious anemia is because of B12 deficiency, because maturation cannot happen. Megaloblastic anemia is because of folic acid deficiency. This pernicious anemia you might have discussed in the chapter of digestion, because vitamin B12, its absorption is dependent upon the gastric mucosa. Stomach produces a factor that is known as Castell's intrinsic factor. Castell's intrinsic factor. What this Castell's intrinsic factor does? This Castell's intrinsic factor, it helps in the absorption of B12. If you have acidity or if your stomach is not functioning properly, Castell's intrinsic factor will not be produced. If it will not be produced, the B12 it will not be absorbed, and when B12 it will not be absorbed, it will result into pernicious anemia. So most important cause of pernicious anemia is defective absorption of vitamin B12, which happens in, you can say, gastric diseases. If there is acidity in the stomach or there is some disorder in the cells which produce the Castell's intrinsic factor. Okay. Folic acid, it produces megaloblastic anemia. Now another thing is change in the shape. We discuss size, now there is shape, and whenever there is change in the shape, it is known as piokilocytosis. Piokilocytosis is the disorder of RBC in which there is change in shape. And basically there are three disorders: sickle cell anemia, in which the RBC shape it becomes sickle shape. We have thalassemia, we have already discussed what happened in this thalassemia. Another thing is spherocytosis. This is important thing. Spherocytosis, this is a disorder in which the shape of RBC from normal biconcave disc changes to sphere. Normal RBC is biconcave. When the shape changes to a sphere, this is a disorder which is known as spherocytosis, and it happens in the genetic disorder that is known as hereditary spherocytosis. What happens in hereditary spherocytosis? I told you, for maintenance of this normal biconcave shape, we require some protein called as spectrin. This spectrin protein is very important. In this hereditary spherocytosis, this spectrin protein is absent. When this spectrin protein is absent, the normal shape, biconcave shape, it changes to sphere. And because of the change in the shape of the RBCs, it cannot pass through the spleen. When it cannot pass through the spleen, it is destroyed early, resulting into hemolysis. Hemolysis means the RBCs are destroyed early. The lifespan of RBC decreases because the sphere shaped RBCs, they will not be able to pass through the capillaries in the spleen because they are very narrow. Biconcave shape helps in squeezing, but the sphere shaped RBCs, they will not be able to pass, so they are hemolyzed in our spleen. This is related to the hereditary spherocytosis. These were some of the disorders of the RBC. In next video, we will be discussing about jaundice, a very important topic related to the RBCs and destruction of the RBCs. If you have any question from this module, you can ask me in the comment section. और अगर वीडियो अच्छा लगा, you can share with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.